Welcome back to another episode of Work Comp Talk. I am beyond excited to be back. Yes, I say be back. If it's you that you've just bumped into us, it's your first time, you might have not noticed we've been gone for a while. But if you have been listening to our podcast for quite some time now, first of all, thank you. And second of all, you might have noticed we were kind of absent for a bit.
Kind of absent, dude. We're gone for like...
forever.
For eternity.
It felt forever, but we promise you it was in good faith, I guess you can say. We were pretty much changing a couple of things internally within our business as well as the podcast. We have a lot of exciting new things coming on board as well, which we're going to be diving and talking about all today because I feel like there's a lot to talk about, but it's very important for us to kind of put everything together so everything just comes together better. Yeah. So we don't want to get you guys off guard. So we're going to kind of explain what some of these changes are going to be. If, again, you're new to the podcast, make sure you subscribe and you share the podcast with anyone you feel might need any type of advice when it comes to workers' comp. My name is Carmen. I am your host for the podcast. And joining me today is Bilal Kassem, president and co-founder of Pacific Workers, the Lawyers for Injured Workers, Northern California's #1 top workers' compensation law firm. Like, hands down. No one else does these videos as good as we do. Seriously.
I don't think anyone else does these videos.
I'm pretty sure there's a few, but I honestly think one of the things that always sets us apart, and you guys can correct us if we're wrong, is the fact that it always turns into a conversation. It's a very educational conversation. Going into the podcast, starting this project, we always knew we wanted to educate and talk about workers' comp, but we didn't want to do it in a way where it was almost like, oh, hi, this is the Work Comp channel, and today we're going to talk about XYZ. No, it was more so, let's have a conversation, let's be casual about it, and let's just talk what we know and what we might think could work for a person that is injured or is going through a workers' comp case or dealing with the system itself, right? So I think we nailed it. I don't think...
The community engagement, prior to disappearing, again, sorry, was really good. And we've kind of fallen off. And for those who have been, loyal listeners to the podcast and who have engaged either on our YouTube channel for Pacific Workers or for our Work Comp Talk channel, I apologize that we've been kind of MIA and maybe we haven't been as responsive as we used to be for comments and questions. We're jumping back on the saddle, though, and we hope to be far more engaged just as we were before. And so... for those that have been interacting with us on our channel and stuff, we're looking forward to being back and giving you guys feedback and interacting with you more, because ultimately this show is really about and for the community.
It is. Ultimately, we are excited to get any type of comments, any type of feedback. You guys already know we dived into the FAQs, which, by the way, in this new series of the podcast, we will be including a lot more FAQ footage. There will be questions and answers that we're going to actually grab from the comments. So feel free to start dropping comments into whatever platform it is you're listening on. And even on TikTok, we do have a lot of engagement on TikTok. We do have a lot of engagement happening on LinkedIn as well as YouTube. So feel free to drop some questions, and we are going to work on getting most of these questions answered on our future sessions, the FAQ sessions, for example. And there's just been so much content below that it's been so hard to really put it out there. Having a podcast is not just sitting down and recording. We have to edit, we have to schedule, we have to post. It's a full-time job. And we're still growing. The company and the podcast is definitely growing on a daily basis. So I think the best way for us to kind of contribute more and be able to share all of this knowledge, all of this information we currently have, is creating different variations within the podcast. And that's going to mean moving forward, we're probably going to have shorter versions of the podcast, which we're going to be considering as tips. Mm-hmm. So let's say Bilal is busy on a hearing, or he's busy with one of the cases, and he might not be able to record. Guess what? We'll be able to still drop a few tips, shorter versions of podcasts, which are still going to enlighten you throughout any course, anyone going through workers' comp. And essentially, it's going to be sharing that information that we don't want to keep hidden. If anything, we want to share it as much as we can. So you will expect shorter versions of podcasts, which we're going to be considering the tips.
And don't let that scare you, though. Yes. The same format's still going to be around, and we're still going to do our long format podcasts, because I think for most listeners, at least what we saw in feedback, is people were really engaged and like the content that we produced. And our goal here is obviously to provide the most valuable, useful information that we can find to deliver to you guys. So.
That is correct. So with that being said, if there is a tip that essentially let's just say we publish a tip on a Wednesday and you'd like for us to dive deeper into that conversation, we totally can on the following episode. Just again, make sure you guys comment and leave your comments below and engage with us and let us know, what do you guys actually want to hear? I think there's no better way for us to come up with content than to hear exactly what you guys want to essentially listen to and get to know about more than anything. There's a lot of changes, but I promise you the changes that are coming are good. We're back. That's, I think, the most important part is the fact that we have so much to share. A lot has happened. Speaking about change, I don't know if you've heard, Bilal recently talked about, not that long ago, in one of our YouTube videos, about weed.
Yep.
And how it can no longer be held against you if you decide to be that person, that coworker that, hey, once I'm off the clock, I'm going to go and do what I have to do. And now your job can't hold you accountable for it. So there is an assembly bill for that. I can't think of the number, but I'm pretty sure you know it.
It's 2188.
Of course you know. Okay, so we're going to be talking about change. How about we dive into that as well in this podcast?
Let's do it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. So let's go into what it was before this bill. Like, what was it like?
You know, I think in the few states that have ventured down the path of legalizing marijuana, it's been an incredibly vague area. You know, it's always been illegal federally.
Right.
And so there's been the notion that it's illegal federally, contrasting with progressive state laws about marijuana becoming more legalized.
Yeah.
And I'd say probably over the last decade, you know, you've seen some changes, especially in California, Colorado, Washington, where they started saying, okay, well, marijuana was legal medicinally. And then everyone developed glaucoma all of a sudden.
All of a sudden
we're all like, yeah, you know, my neck started hurting or I get anxiety or whatever it is. And not to make fun of those conditions because some people do have them. And quite frankly, there seems to be a lot of information and medical research out there that suggests that marijuana can be extremely helpful for chronic pain and people going through cancer treatment or whatever. So I believe in it. It's just there was some notion that people who wanted to use it recreationally started developing these conditions. You'd like go on these online websites with these doctors that would jump on like a quick video call and you'd be like, my neck hurts, and it'd be like, I recommend marijuana, and they'd have like all these different like brands of like gummy bears and stuff.
Right.
And, like it was what it was, and everyone I think kind of knew it. But like marijuana has now become, you know, it's changed a lot, and now, you know, it's legal and there's dispensaries and you can go and you can buy it and it's no big deal. Of course, that still hasn't translated over very well to the employment law side of things.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of employers and even medical professionals that are old school and they still don't like marijuana.
Yeah.
You know, they still think it's bad.
Yeah.
And so previously there were no laws that would prohibit an employer for, you know, terminating you or disciplining you for consumption of marijuana off of work, which makes no sense. You can go get as drunk as you want on a Saturday night, go back into work on Monday, no one cares. So like, who cares if you have an edible and eat a gourmet pizza and watch a movie on your couch Friday night and then go back to work on Monday? It doesn't make sense, right?
I'm glad you put it like that because I never thought about it that way. That's true. You're okay to go get drunk on a weekend, or essentially your boss, the company you're working for, the organization's okay. They don't care if you drink or not. But yet if you smoke, they do. And now putting that into that perspective, it's like, that is so true. Who cares what I do on the weekend? That's my personal life. Yep. It shouldn't affect the worker I am Monday through Friday.
Yeah. And ultimately that's a byproduct of lobbyists, right? You have the alcohol industry and you have the tobacco industry, which is gigumongous, right? It's humongous amount of money. Yeah. You know, Philip Morris and company and such, that they probably didn't want, you know, marijuana to be legalized because that affects their bottom line, because people stop consuming that and start consuming
politics.
More marijuana. Exactly. It's money, it's politics, all that jazz. But California doing the right thing, they're looking after the people and saying, you know what, marijuana is legal in the state. Why should employers be able to decide what people do off the job?
Right.
And so Governor Newsom signed this new bill, Assembly Bill 2188, that goes into effect January 1, 2024, so not quite yet. So
a few months.
It's getting there.
Yeah.
But ultimately, once January 1st, 2024 rolls around, it'll be illegal for an employer to discriminate against you based on off-work marijuana use.
Can you define the word discriminate? Because I think that falls into so many categories. Can you give a rough estimate of an example of what people should look out for? Like,
Sure. So I think it all goes back to what's called the Fair Employment Housing Act. So California has a Civil Rights Act. It's their version of the 1964 Civil Rights Act from the Fed side of things, and it's called FEHA for short. FEHA protects against things like discrimination and retaliation based on sex, gender, religion, age, protected classes.
right.
And in that, discrimination can be defined in a lot of different ways. You can be passed over for promotion.
Right.
You can be terminated, have your pay rate cut, be suspended.
Right.
There's varying degrees of discrimination, but ultimately it means disparate treatment, meaning treating you differently than any other position or any other person in your position just based upon whatever that protected class is.
Definitely.
And so in particular, this could apply to things like pre-employment drug screening, where if an employer has you go and do pre-employment drug screening and they see cannabis in your system and they say, you know what, we're not going to hire you for that now.
Right.
Under this provision, that would be illegal.
Ooh, that's going to change things, because what about those jobs that do send you to drug tests prior to getting hired?
Well, you know, they can still drug test you, right? Like, you shouldn't have cocaine in your system or things like that. But, like, it'll, for the specific finding of cannabis in your system, it'll change the dynamic tremendously. But there's also positions, types of jobs that are exempt from this statute, and those won't change.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's those jobs that essentially do need someone focused, and you just can't fuck it up.
Yeah. So federal jobs are excluded, obviously,
course.
because it's still illegal federally. So, you know, I'm sorry, feds don't want you rolling into work after a weekend getting high and eating pizza. Bummer,
Sorry.
but it is what it is. The other one is loosely defined as construction and trades. So this is going to be an area that's probably hotly litigated.
Right.
Meaning, you know, the legislature is really good at coming out with statutes and prohibiting things or banning things or whatever the case may be, or permitting things, but they're very bad at defining things.
Yep.
And quite frankly, historically, that's been the job of lawyers in the courts. Legislature comes out with laws. We try to work within the court system to interpret what the legislature actually wanted to accomplish, and the judges help decide what is included or not included in these definitions.
You gotta love human beings. We love complicating things.
Yeah. So, you know, construction and trades, I think, you know, most people would say, okay, that applies to anything that would require a contractor's license. You know, framing, concrete, masonry,
Carpentry,
electrical work, carpentry,
painting.
right? Plumbing, things like that.
Yeah.
I think all of those would be included in construction trades. You know, I think it gets a little more dicey when you start talking about the ancillary services that don't necessarily require a specialized license or permit. You know, what does that include? You know, does a truck driver delivering, you know, steel or lumber to a job site count as part of the construction
trade? Yeah, no, there's so many ifs from it, right? There's so many questions from it. And it makes sense. They're essentially working with machinery, working with, you know, power tools, and
they're dangerous jobs.
They are. They're on top of a roof.
Dangerous. Yeah, mad respect to people in the trades, because I mean, you know, I would work for fun and stuff, and like after a long day of working on a project, like, man, like my hands hurt, my back hurts and stuff, my knees hurt, and these guys are busting their butt day in, day out, doing extremely hard work. And so crazy amount of respect for them. But also, I understand the idea that they need to be on their best. Like, they need to be on their A game. They can't show up to work and be kind of off base when you're working with dangerous equipment.
Yeah.
And also with other people in positions where your decisions in work can affect their health and welfare as well.
Right.
So, you know, I get that.
It makes sense, I guess. It just goes hand in hand. But that's a good thing. It's a good thing for those that constantly go to work and they're nervous because maybe they do like smoking weed. Maybe that's who they are. Maybe it doesn't hurt them, or maybe they don't even do that much of it. They just do it to help themselves relax, go to sleep better. And it's like, it's constantly on the back of their mind. Like, you know, what is my boss going to say? What is going to happen? Shoot, I remember in my old jobs, there was times where people had to hide while they were trying to go out on a weekend. They didn't want to bump into anyone that could potentially see them. And it's kind of a good thing that they're going to actually pass this law for the people that benefit from it, you know? How does this affect getting injured on the job? Let's just say you got high the night before, you go to work, you got injured. Obviously, you're going to have cannabis in your system.
So there's a statute, surprise, surprise. Basically, there are certain things that are automatic bar to collecting work comp benefits.
Yep.
Being a first aggressor in a fight, committing a felony, you know, if you rob your employer, and in the case of robbing,
and get hurt,
sorry. But voluntary intoxication is one of them. So key is voluntary there. So if you get hurt, just say, "Oh, someone gave me weed. I didn't know. It wasn't intentional.
I accidentally grabbed the wrong brownies."
Yeah, exactly. I didn't mean to get intoxicated, so it wasn't voluntary. No, just kidding. Don't lie. Don't make things up. But yeah, so if you're voluntarily intoxicated, meaning if you voluntarily consume a substance which ultimately causes your injury, you would be barred from collecting workers' comp benefits. There's been a lot of litigation about the burden of proof and what it actually means to be intoxicated and what it means to actually have your intoxication be a cause of your injury. And so it's not enough for the defense to prove that you had marijuana in your system and that around the same time you got hurt. Because just the fact that you were high doesn't necessarily mean that you being high actually caused your injury.
Yeah.
And so that's been a hotly litigated topic, and it's something we fight over all the time. And it really depends on the mechanics of the injury. You know, if you're high and you're working on a construction site and, you know, some guy saws your arm off by mistake, or someone's working, you know, above head, you know, and a piece of steel falls on your head from, you know, way far up. The fact you're high didn't cause the injury.
Right.
You know, so I think those would be cases where we'd probably fight and win that battle. But a case, for example, where you're, you know, there's witnesses that say your coordination just seemed off, you were stumbling around, and, you know, later in the day your injury is that you fell off scaffolding.
Yeah.
And then they find out you're intoxicated. That may be in a condition, a place where, you know, with the witness statements, and combined with the type of injury you have, the defense might actually win on that, because they might say, hey, look, there's enough marijuana in your system to be intoxicated, and people would testify that you were off, right? That you weren't balancing well and stuff, and you fell, then we'd probably lose that.
I'm really glad you shared these examples, because a lot of the times people can take that type of information and kind of like mislead it within their head and say, well, you know, it does say that this and this, but putting these examples into place coming from someone that has understood the law, because that's your job as an attorney in a workers' comp, it definitely makes you think twice. And it's kind of like, okay, now I have all the tools necessary for me to, if I do like to smoke weed on the off work times or premises, or in my own time, like, I know exactly what my limits are. I know exactly what I can and cannot do. And then it's ultimately going to be up to me what decisions I'm going to do that are going to then possibly affect me or not. So thank you for sharing the examples. It really does help.
Yeah, and it's the devil's in the details with these kinds of cases. We've had a lot where they're hard to prove and stuff, but ultimately it's not your burden to prove that you weren't intoxicated. Once you've established an injury, it becomes the defense's responsibility to prove that you were intoxicated. So, you know, I think a lot of people think it's the other way around. It's not, you know, it's not your burden to establish that. It's their job.
Okay, good to know.